Good afternoon, or good morning, depending on where you are in the U.S. today. I'm Dwayne Marsh. I'm a senior advisor in the Office of Sustainable Housing and Communities, and I'll be your host today as we navigate our way through the 2011 fiscal year NOFA, Notice of Funding Availability for the Sustainable Communities Regional Planning Grant. To say we're excited here at our office is a bit of an understatement. This has been an incredible few weeks for us. The Challenge Grant Program notice is also available. We're in the midst of our competition for the Capacity Building for Sustainable Communities Grant Program in cooperation with EPA and our other federal partners. But in some ways, we are really excited about this program getting started because it represents a chance to see how we've moved forward as an office, an agency, and a nation around the issues of long-range sustainability and regional planning. We had an amazing cohort of winners that we'll talk about for a moment in our past fiscal year. And we hope we've improved the NOFA in ways that can make the bar possible to even be reached and exceeded with this current cohort. So I'm going to run us through a bit of a presentation that gives you the basics of our program and the notice. I'll run through some of the frequently asked questions that we know you probably have. And then we'll actually take questions at our website, which is sustainablecommunities@hud.gov. And my colleague Thaddeus Winsick will forward those to us as well. So let's go ahead and get into the basic presentation if we can. Essentially, when we talk about sustainability here at the agency, we can go to the very top in terms of what we mean. Our own Secretary, Sean Donovan, who has said that for HUD, sustainability means tying the quality and location of housing to broader opportunities, like access to good jobs, quality schools, and safe streets. It means helping communities that face common problems start sharing solutions. It means being a partner to sustainable development, not a barrier. That is a driver for our mission here at HUD, to the point where we even brought those terms into our mission statement. So when we say sustainable communities, we're talking about urban, suburban, and rural places that successfully integrate housing, land use, economic and workforce development, transportation, and infrastructure investments in a manner that empowers jurisdictions to consider the interdependent challenges of economic competitiveness and revitalization, social equity, inclusion, and access to opportunity, energy use and climate change, and public health and environmental impact. Often you'll hear the term livability used frequently in this work as well. For us, that's a measure of the integration of the housing and transportation and environmental employment amenities accessible to residents. And livable community is really one that has multiple modes of transportation, different types of housing, and amenities located within a reasonable distance for families and communities. This all underlies the work of the Partnership for Sustainable Communities, a three-agency collaboration here at the federal government that is growing formally, maybe soon, but informally with a number of agencies, most notably USDA, who've come together around what we call livability principles. HUD, DOT, and EPA, that's the Department of Transportation and the Environmental Protection Agency, are formal partners in this Partnership for Livable Communities, and we're committed to aligning our programs and resources in support of these livability principles. Those principles really include being sure we provide more transportation choices to increase safety, accessibility, and reliability while reducing household transportation costs, promoting equitable, affordable housing that expands both location and energy-efficient housing choices, looking at how we can improve our economic competitiveness of neighborhoods by giving people reliable access to employment centers, educational opportunities, and other basic services, targeting our federal funding toward existing communities to increase community revitalization, maintain infrastructure, and support local needs, aligning our federal policies and funding to remove barriers to collaboration, leverage funding, and increase the effectiveness of existing programs, and finally, but not least by any stretch, enhancing the unique characteristics of all communities, whether rural, suburban, or urban. Now, the lore has it on the partnership, which is now more than 2 years old, that when the two secretaries and the administrator got together in preparation for a testimony to the Senate Banking Committee back in April of 2009, that when they talked about the alignment of their principles, there was virtually no wordsmithing that needed to be done, that each agency really had the same concept about how to achieve sustainability and livability in their work. There may have been a little bit of wordsmithing, but the truth remains that there has been tremendous alignment between the agencies since then as they work to remove barriers, increase resource opportunities, and align our own work in all of the areas that relate to sustainability. For HUD's part, the role in the partnership really is to stimulate more integrated planning, to guide state, metropolitan, and local investments in land use, transportation, and housing, as well as to challenge localities to undertake zoning and land use reforms to support more inclusive, sustainable communities. That word inclusive is so important that we've now integrated it into the HUD mission statement. Now, this is a voluntary program. This is one where we are putting out the call for those who are aligned with these principles and want to participate. And so we're excited at the amount of response that we've had to this point and continue to encourage communities to think about this as a possible way to move forward. For the 2 grant years that we're now talking about, we've had our FY10 competition and we're moving into FY11. There'll be more than $166 million that's been invested or will be invested in the regional planning grants. There's $68 million that have been invested into the Community Challenge Planning Grants, and many of you are thinking about that program as well, and which part of the webcast yesterday. More than $5 million in capacity building grants to intermediaries to support these winners and recipients of technical assistance from certain EPA programs. And then $10 million for a joint effort on research between HUD, the Department of Transportation, and the Environmental Protection Agency. So, year 1. What did we learn? What did we do? More than 225 applications, actually exactly 225 applications were received for the Regional Planning Grant Program with more than $450 million in demand. $98 million was awarded to 45 regions across the country. So essentially a 1 in 5 chance of winning the competition if you were entering last year. 13 of those grants went to regions with populations of less than 200,000. Continuing to reflect a strong sentiment for sustainability in rural places that we've heard in our own walkabout and in the comments we received when we did our first advance notice for comments about how this NOFA should be designed. And the rich diversity really reflects the goals and local goals and challenges people have, from Greater Boston to the New York metro area to rural Apache County, Arizona, Porcupine, South Dakota, Gulfport, Mississippi. No end to the variety of applicants we had looking at this program. And that, for us, the diversity means that just that. Any number of kinds of communities, issue areas, perspectives, public, private sector, communities marginalized from the planning process previously, all of these are voices that need to be heard when we think about how we invest in our communities for long-term sustainability. The Community Challenge Planning Grant Program, we awarded $40 million. Some of that in combination with DOT to support better integration between transportation, housing, economic development, and land use, and there was more than $1.28 billion in demand, so about a 1 in 9 chance of being awarded the grant. 43% of the awards there went to places with populations of less than 100,000, reinforcing the previous points around rural communities. This map shows you the lay of the land, not just of the regional planning grants and the challenge grants from our office, but a whole array of resources and investments made by the partnership in what I like to call Green October. October of last year, where more than $800 million was awarded between our programs, the Tiger Planning and Tiger Construction programs, FTA livability grants, EPA Sustainable Communities, TA and Brownfield grants, and other programs as well. As you can see, virtually every state in the country covered in a nice geographic spread, one we hope to improve with this year's competition. We're hoping to find out soon who will be added to this map. So I'm going to get into a little more detail about the Sustainable Communities Regional Planning Grant Program now. And this is the main point of this webcast, and where we'll be answering most of our questions today. The overview of the program has not shifted that dramatically from last year's competition for those who were in it before. We're trying to support metropolitan and multi-jurisdictional planning efforts to integrate housing, land use, economic and workforce development, transportation, and infrastructure planning. And again, this notion of empowering communities to really think about these things in interdependent ways, considering growth and revitalization, social equity, access to opportunity, public health, environmental impact. We did not get the full funding we requested for the second year of the program. We have approximately $70 million as opposed to the $100 million we had last year, so there will be fewer resources to be shared. $2 million of that, though, is contributed to a capacity building grant program, which I referenced earlier. And $17.5 million of this year's competition is committed to regions with a population of less than 500,000. The period of performance is generally 36 months, and these are cooperative agreements, which means that HUD will be deeply involved both in the negotiation and the execution of the awards once they have been awarded. As before, there are 2 funding categories. One is around regional plans for sustainable development, and the second category is for those who have moved a little further along the continuum, if you will, around sustainable planning, moving into how to really focus on implementation around detailed execution plans and programs. We'll describe the distinctions and how you make those choices about which category to apply to shortly. We're going to, though, have a pleasant surprise. Not really surprise. Good to see you here. Shelley Patici, our director, has joined us, and she's going to just say a few things back to the context a little bit, but really about what we mean in this moment and what the excitement is in the federal circles around the program itself. So, Shelley.
Great. Good afternoon and good morning, everybody. I'm sorry I'm late to the party, but that does not diminish my excitement about this competition, our second year in the Sustainable Communities Regional Planning Grant Program. The level of excitement that this initiative has generated is just phenomenal. Both in communities across the country, we're just seeing a level of dialogue and interest and kind of taking grip on the future and trying to figure out how to get our economy back on track and do it in a sustainable way. And then within the federal government, I'm sure Dwayne mentioned, there's also a tremendous amount of excitement about this particular grant program, and we have a number of new federal agencies joining the group that will be reviewing these grants. The level of excitement and energy around this within a whole range of different domestic federal agencies is really great. And one of the things that I saw over the last year, which I hope will entice you to submit an application to the program, is through the work of these staff in DOT, EPA, agriculture, economic development, FEMA, arts, because we've had such enormous interest, they're now thinking about how they can align their funding programs to be more consistent with your work. So this is really gratifying, and I hope that you will all join us and work to get a great application in. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Dwayne, and then I'll be here for questions and answers as well.
Great. So we'll move on, and to giving the overview. There are a number of program goals, and this will be both you'll find these in the NOFA themselves, and you'll also will have this webcast archived, so if you ever want to come back and refer to this PowerPoint, you'll be able to do that. The PowerPoint's also posted on our website, which I should mention is www.hud.gov/sustainability. That will take you directly to our program office and a number of resources that can help you as you navigate the application process. But you see the kinds of things we're talking about in terms of really creating communities that are consistent with the livability principles, creating alliances of residents and regional interest groups that maintain the long-term vision, getting jurisdictions and the metropolitan agencies to work together to integrate their plans, thinking about how you can create greater transparency into planning efforts, how we make sure that we assist regions that have shown long-term commitment to sustainability to move on to implementation, and importantly, how we make sure federal agencies can better support local and regional planning and reduce redundant and conflicting federal requirements. A lot of dialogue across the offices about how we make sure we're good partners and not impediments to the success you're trying to create on the ground. There are some changes that I would point out from last year's NOFA to this year's, and this isn't a complete list, but it's a very important list. But I will say, to paraphrase our colleague who's not here right now, Zuleika Morales-Romero, read the NOFA. Even if these changes are all clear to you, you really need to make sure you read the NOFA and the general section to get a full understanding of how to apply. As I mentioned, we had $98 million in our last fiscal year. This year we have $68 million. We kept the proportion for small populations. It was formerly $25 million. It will now be $17.5 million. Eligibility, those who are in geographies that were covered by the previous planning grants are not eligible for this year's competition. I should mention that some partners can be a part of neighboring communities' applications and certain conditions, but we can't fund to do work in the places we're already funding to do work. The purpose, we've added additional references to education to emphasize its importance to regional sustainability and economic development, which was important last year, continues to be important, and we've highlighted that more throughout the NOFA. We clarified some of the definitions last year based on questions we received around what a cooperative agreement is, what we mean by social equity. We also tried to highlight how tribal entities' involvement as eligible consortium partner can be more clear. We also have been raised the bar, really, if you will, on the Category 2 qualification. Based on our experience this year, we realized we weren't entirely clear on what we meant in a Category 2 application. And so we've made that more clear to identify during the pre-app process how you should determine whether you should be Category 1 or 2, and I'll say more about that shortly. The geography, this is an important, I think, improvement. We've added state-designated regional planning districts and the U.S. EDA's economic development districts as eligible geographies for the program, and that's a change from last year. The grant amounts for the large regions, it remains a maximum of $5 million. Medium regions, we've increased from $2 million and from $1 million for small to now $3 million and $1.5 million respectively. And we raised the grant minimums. That was based on our experience with budgets and the program work that's happening right now in the communities that received last year's grants. We now have a map-based or a web-based map tool to help you propose or produce the map of your proposed region. And you'll see that when you go to our website. Other eligible activities, we've increased the references to energy efficiency and green building, climate mitigation, and private finance strategies, which we've known from the beginning were really critical to the success of the implementation of these grants, have been further highlighted. And then finally, we brought some of the language around civil rights that was in the general section into the NOFA itself so that people can really absorb those requirements as they get started. As I mentioned, 2 funding categories. Category 1 is regional plans for sustainable development, and this is really for those places that don't have such plans or they have the plans and they need significant revision. You know, a lot of places have regional plans, but sustainability wasn't a major aspect of it. Or there have been elements of sustainable planning that have been covered in various communities, but it hasn't been integrated and synthesized. This is the category where you would do that work to bring those plans together to come up with one long-range plan for the region and build your vision about how you're going to move forward. Hopefully that document becomes the driving document for any number of other legally binding documents that you have within your community for long-range planning. If you've done most of that work at this point and you feel there's minimal work to be done there, but really a lot of work about thinking about how to move to implementation, then Category 2 may be the place for you. That's what we call our detailed execution plans and programs. And again, this could look at interjurisdictional affordable and fair housing strategies, how you really enhance your resident engagement and decision making, how you look, there's some limited pre-development expenses for regionally significant projects, and you must demonstrate that you've adopted and have an accepted long-range plan. Within the NOFA, there's a little diagnostic test with 9 questions you can ask yourself, and if you're doing 6 or more of those, you may be ready for Category 2. There are many expectations for the grant recipients. Just ask this year's cohort. They're living that right now. But what I'd say is, as you're coming into the process, you should at least show your aspirations about how you'll identify transportation, economic development, land use, environment, energy, green space, water infrastructure needs, and other priorities for the region, how you'll establish performance goals and measures that are at a minimum consistent with the livability principles, how you plan to clearly define a single integrated plan for regional growth and reinvestment over a minimum 20-year time frame, how you want to make this plan consistent with the HUD, DOT, and EPA plans, such as Consolidated Plan, Long-Range Transportation Plan, Stormwater Management, how you're going to engage residents and stakeholders substantively in the development of shared regional vision and implementation early and throughout the process. Now, there are some threshold requirements in order to be a part of this competition. Number 1, read the NOFA. I say that every now and then just to remind you. But you must meet the pre-application deadline, which is August 25th, 2012. It's 13 days from now, and judging from the increasing volume of emails and calls we're getting, you guys are noticing that, which is good. If you don't meet the pre-application deadline, you cannot compete in the full competition. I'll say a bit about why we did pre-application in a moment. You also must meet all the threshold requirements contained in the general section. You must provide a minimum of 20% in matching funds or in-kind contributions of your total grant request. You must make sure you meet all the eligibility requirements that are set forth in the NOFA about participating in as a consortium. You must submit proof of partnerships, and you must identify yourself as applying in one of the 3 size applicant types and provide a map of the proposed geography. You must request an amount that's allowable to the NOFA for your grant. If you request more than you're allowed to ask, you may not be considered for a grant. You must represent a region that meets the geographic requirements. You can only apply in one funding category. You cannot simultaneously be Category 1 and Category 2. No one can be a lead applicant in more than one application. You may be, in certain circumstances, the national organization that's in more than one application, but you cannot be the lead in more than one. You must submit a budget summary, And if you're applying to be Category 2, you'll have to provide a copy of the Working Regional Plan for Sustainability. That's the basis for the proposed work, and it's been accepted within the region as the framing document of regional planning. Now, if you fail to do that, you'll automatically be reviewed as Category 1, which means you could still compete for a grant, but then there'll be maybe certain questions that you're not answering because you're filling out a Category 2, and the questions are slightly different for Category 1, and that could cost you points. So the geography, as I mentioned, has expanded. There are 4 basic ways to look at the geography. A single MPO's jurisdiction or the jurisdiction of 2 or more adjacent MPOs can apply. A metropolitan statistical area can apply, or a micropolitan statistical area, or in a limited number of cases, a metropolitan division, if your combined statistical area has a population that exceeds 7 million. Most of you know that limits the number of those that will get to 3 or 4 places around the country where metropolitan divisions will come into play. Now, these are the new ones. A region designated under state law or gubernatorial executive order for the purpose of facilitating and coordinating local government planning for land use, transportation, economic development, parks and open space, or other related activities is now a geography that's allowable, or an economic development district as designated by the EDA. So in no case do you, though, want to have a portion of your region, just a portion, unless the region is defined by MPO boundaries, or if it's a state-designated planning boundary, as we just described. Now, if you're a non-delineated area, and none of these things apply to you, the area that's one that's entirely outside of the boundaries of a micropolitan or metropolitan statistical area, you can actually design your area. You can self-designate the boundaries. The consortium still has to have certain participants, but that geography is for you to design. Eligible applicants. We begin with the traditional central city or cities within the boundaries of the region if it's in a metropolitan statistical area as defined by OMB. You want to make sure you have all of the city, county, and other units of local general government located within the region to reach at least 50% of the population of the region. You want to make sure that any Indian tribes necessary to ensure that the consortium reaches that percentage of population is met as well. The MPO, if there is one, or if the region has multiple MPOs, all the MPOs that have jurisdiction within the region. And then also a nonprofit partner or educational institution within the region that has the capacity or the ability to work with units of general local government or MPOs that will then advance the objectives of the Sustainable Communities Regional Planning Grant Program. These 3 basic pillars form the legs of the stool. Beyond that, any number of partners are allowable within the consortium, but those 3 must be present. And as soon as we jump forward, jump too far forward. If you're in a non-defined area, slightly different requirements. You do have to have the local general government units or Indian tribes representing at least 50% of the population within the region you've designed, and you also must have the nonprofit organization or educational institution. As I mentioned, a consortium can include state governments. It can include entities established by the state government. It can be council of governments, rural planning organizations, Indian tribal groups, or multi-tribal organizations. It could be additional nonprofit organizations, educational institutions, regional government organizations or bodies, private sector entities. All of these are eligible to be part of the consortium that applies. The geography, which is important to decide how much money you can apply for. We have 3 population categories. Congress mandated that we at least reserve 25% of the grant dollars for what they called regions under 500,000 in population. In listening to the field in our initial walkabout and also in the work that we've done this first year, we've split that even further. So we have 3 categories. The large metropolitan areas for populations greater than 500,000 within the geographic area. Those places can apply for between $1 million and $5 million. The medium-sized region is between populations between 200,000 and 499,999 people. That is for a minimum of 600,000 to a maximum of 3 million. And for the small-sized region, rural communities or small town areas, population less than 200,000 within the area, the minimum of 400,000, the maximum of 1.5 million. Activities that are eligible are numerous. I will just highlight a few of these. You want to make sure you're coordinating intergovernmental planning and related public and private development. You want to make sure you're developing a comprehensive regional plan for sustainable development that is a guide for local planning and includes a housing plan that ensures the full range of housing affordable to all ranges of income. An equity and fair housing analysis into regional planning through development of a regional analysis of impediments to fair housing choice. Regional transportation that reduces VMT and greenhouse gas emissions. Water infrastructure plan that makes sure that investments in drinking water, wastewater, and stormwater are supportable and sustainable and by the community in the long term. We have to to change the battery in my clicker. The environmental planning, including assessment of environmental impacts and land use decisions, planning for economic development, scenario planning, looking at comprehensive climate change, energy efficiency and green building plans aimed at reducing energy consumption in buildings, looking at long-term policies and administrative procedures that can be improved, how you align your infrastructure investments, how you make sure to ensure public decision-making and meaningful resident participation to the visioning, development, and implementation of the plan, how you identify measures to track progress. If you're Category 2, you might even engage in site-specific planning and design of capital projects to be included in the plan. And then technical planning studies that relate to any of number of the things I just mentioned that will support their execution. There are some things you can't do. A number of OMB circulars that govern activities that can't be done. You should refer to these as you're looking at your the NOFA and prepare to apply. Duplicative activities that have been approved by previously awarded planning grants. Activities that are funded or planned to be funded through an existing formula or other award from a federal agency. This money should not replace money that you have committed from a federal agency to do planning work. Developing plans that would assist businesses or industry to relocate to an area to the detriment of communities where the business is currently located. In these cases, there are special conditions under uniform relocation assistance that have to be followed. And then substitution of these funds, again, for anything pledged to support community development, watershed, housing, planning, etc. We don't want to replace dollars for existing planning dollars. So I'm going to take a moment and just quickly run through these rating factors to give you a sense of where we're prioritizing our scoring. The reviewers are trained and ready to go, and so they'll be using these kind of criteria that you're seeing right here as they evaluate the proposals that you submit. They are looking first and foremost in this section, the factor 1, the capacity of the applicant and the relevant organizational experience that they have. 15 points out of what is a total of 104 around both your organizational capacity and qualifications, your capability and qualification of key personnel, and your capacity to address economic and social disparities. And this is a new thing that we've called out in the NOFA to really see what staff capacity and organizational capacity you have to address the disparities that we recognize if they continue in a region, we really can't achieve regional equity or regional sustainability. And then the number of things you would expect to see when you talk about your organizational capacity. We also want to see ability around executing transportation long-range plans, being able to analyze job trends, looking at how you describe the activities that you'll accomplish towards achieving livability principles, and importantly, how you engage the private sector in your planning activities. Because we recognize a solely public sector effort will not really accomplish what we're trying to do in these regions. Rating factor 2 looks at the need and extent of the problem. There have been some slight changes to this year's rating factor 2 form. We've emphasized further the narrative statement of need that was required last year as well, and we've reduced slightly the automated calculation of how you fit into kind of regional baskets of economic severity or need. But still, it's important for you to tell us about housing costs, environmental quality, transportation access, socioeconomic inequity, economic opportunity, food access, and healthy communities. There's data available on our website, or instructions at least how to find that data and collect it. And then the narrative section allows you to elaborate on that data if you want, or to explain the data that's missing and tell the story. But basically, within this rating factor, you get to tell why you have the need for a regional planning program. And this sets up well with the next section, rating factor 3, where you tell us how you're going to address the problem, and then rating factor 5, which tells us how you plan to measure your progress and success. To that point, 50 points, or half the application's value, is to soundness of approach. It looks at everything from how you, the general description of your proposed regional plan, to how you propose to develop your regional plan, how you'll do governance and management, how you'll implement the project, the budget proposal you'll put forward, and departmental policy priorities. We have improved the clarity of instructions around the budget, which I'll talk about in a moment. We also have, this is Category 1. For Category 2, it's slightly different. You already have a plan, so you would talk about the process to improve your plan. But we really want to see, again, as I mentioned, how the proposed plan will take the needs you've identified in rating factor 2, address those conditions in rating factor 3, the outcomes anticipate you'll be able to produce, and then measure those for progress. So each of these sections has various points, 8 points for the description of your plan, which should really lay out the context of what you're trying to address and how you plan to move forward, how you incorporate the livability principles, how you'll respond to the needs that were demonstrated in rating factor 2, what are the critical regional assets you need to advance sustainability, and then how you build inclusive communities free from discrimination and advance access to economic opportunity for all segments of the population. When you talk about your process to develop a regional plan for sustainable development, you should talk about how you'll build a broad cross-section of communities to engage in the process, including low-income, minority, and economically disadvantaged communities, as well as the private sector, other parts of the business community, educational sectors, making sure you have ways to address the existing conditions, talk about the relationship between the engagement activities anticipated through your planning process and the populations that face those disparities across the community. People who are at the brunt of the issues that are plaguing our communities have to be part of addressing and identifying the solutions. And then tell us about how you'll formulate the strategy to address the barriers that you identified as a result of the regional visioning process. Also, you can tell us a little bit about how you'll involve other public agencies, including state agencies and special districts, in order to advance elements of the regional plan. How you plan to deal with residential and small business displacement that could result from infrastructure investments. How you'll track metrics to gauge and guide the progress of plan implementation. Governance and management. The formal structure you anticipate putting forward for the consortium, including its decision-making mechanisms and specific strategies to ensure that perspectives of diverse, traditionally underrepresented populations directly influence the development and implementation of the plan, is 5 points. This is held out in the NOFA. That's a very important priority for us, and we're learning as we work with our partners this year how important it is to have a structure in mind and designed, and that's why we're calling this out very specifically. And in different places, we're learning there are different kinds of diversity that have to be addressed. Your goal is to tell us what those diversities are and how you plan to have them in the process, from conceptualization to visualization to plan development to implementation. The budget resources that will be dedicated to ensuring those organizations can deepen the diversity in the planning process as well, and then also how you plan to ensure implementation. That schedule should come with some kind of timeline for developing the regional plan, including anticipated start and end dates for each activity, milestones for critical actions, and the metrics you plan to take as well. And then, you can detail the mechanisms that are used to advance economic development opportunity for populations performing below the regional median. That could include monitoring agreements in communities, economic development strategies, targeted neighborhood plans, and activities that affirmatively further fair housing. The budget proposal, we were a little bit less clear about this last year. We weren't sure what we were to anticipate, and now we know. And so we have been very clear about what we're looking for you to put in your budget proposal. The thing I would highlight here is that both the fact that we want a budget narrative that really describes what you're including, and we also want to see no less than 10% of the budget requests committed to activities that specifically support the goals of the NOFA to deepen the engagement and participation of non-traditional governance structures. Now, this is because a lot of groups last year had that aspiration, but did not actually include those dollars in their budget, and as a consequence, are trying to figure out now how to resource those opportunities in their communities. So we figure we'll make it easy from the top, put the money where your mouth is on these ideas, and then follow through, and you'll have the dollars there, and that question won't come up later. So do look at this, because this will be something that's rated in the NOFA. Maybe not pointing in the right direction. And then finally, on Factor 3, our policy priorities around capacity building and knowledge sharing, and how you expand cross-cutting policy knowledge, as before, will be worth 4 points. Rating Factor 4, there are some changes here as well. Leverage resources. This factor is really to see how you can obtain other community, public sector, private sector, and resources that can be combined with the program resources from HUD to achieve your program outcomes. Federal dollars cannot count towards match unless otherwise permitted by that program's authorizing statute. That's very important, so I'll say it again. Federal dollars cannot count towards match unless otherwise permitted by that program's authorizing statute. That being said, there are points available if you align planning activities from other federal agencies with the planning activities you anticipate doing in this program. So your federally mandated transportation planning, SEDS planning from EDA, your revolving loan funds, show the alignment there. There are potentially points available for that. We also are providing up to 2 points for applicants to demonstrate that their planning efforts will align with state government initiatives that prioritize sustainable planning and development and reinforce the livability principles as well. In addition, 3 points available depending on the level of dollars above the minimum 20% that's required of match or in kind. 1, 2, 3 points depending on the amount you put forward as your match. That match has to be documented and verified, and the NOFA details the ways in which that has to be done. Rating factor 5, performance measures. Formerly worth 20 points, now worth 18. No less important than before, but we had to get some more points in there for leverage. This is something that wasn't clear entirely last year. We said, fill in this rating factor form that describes your outcomes and how you will do those over time. And then we said, also give us a narrative statement of need. Something we said in the wording didn't make it clear that we wanted both for some people, and so they just did one, the form and not the other. So it is clear this time you have to do both a narrative statement and a rating factor form. You'll be evaluated by the reviewers on both of these things. There are details in the NOFA about exactly what you want to include in that, but also you can supplement the core expectations we have from the 8 outcomes we think are essential with additional outcomes. We suggest some, you may suggest others. I won't go through all of them. They are detailed thoroughly in the NOFA in this PowerPoint, which again will be available on our website, hud.gov/sustainability. So I'll close by just saying a little bit about where we are in the timeline. We put out an advance notice. As everyone knows, we are moving quickly in the federal government to obligate dollars to communities, get them out there where they can do good on the ground. So we gave you a little lead time with the advance notice. On the 27th of last month, we put out the pre-application, which is due on the 25th of this month. And have I mentioned that you can't complete if you don't fill in the pre-application? It's true. Approximately 10 to 12 days after that pre-application, we'll notify you that you're eligible for the full application, but you should press forward with your application because very little is required in the pre-application and a lot's required in the full application. And then the reviews will begin 30 to 45 days after the applications, after the date of the pre-application, the 25th. We will put the due date will be there for the full application. So essentially, the pre-app will come down off our website. Very shortly thereafter, the full application will go up. You should press forward. It will look remarkably like the notice you have currently. And then we will make some adjustments on due dates and the like. The due date will be announced at that point. It'll be 30 to 45 days after the 25th. Press forward. A few days later, you'll get an email letter from us verifying that you're eligible. And there's one thing I should say about the pre-app. We did this in part to make sure that if there was something that wasn't meeting threshold, you would get a warning before you submitted your full application. Nothing's worse than spending 6 to 10 weeks putting an application together and then a technical hang-up prevents you from getting a fair day in court. So if you get a letter back, it may say, this issue or this area of your pre-application is not meeting the standards or the threshold of the NOFA. Please correct it before you resubmit. Because of the peculiarities of the HUD Reform Act, we won't be able to tell you how to correct it, only that it needs to be corrected. It's like a check engine light in your dashboard as you're driving towards the finish line. But there are a number of agencies out there and advocacy groups who could help you figure it out if it's not immediately evident what the mistake is. But you should be able to go back to the NOFA and figure that out. The reviews will go on, and then the awards will be announced shortly thereafter. Support materials, and then I will turn back to Shelley if there's anything she wants to say before we turn to the questions that may be coming in, and Thaddeus Winsick will tell us those questions. Our website, again, hud.gov/sustainability, is where you can find any number of materials, including the frequently asked questions. Further information that comes out will be there. And you can email questions for both this webcast and in general to sustainablecommunities@hud.gov, and we will get back to you as quickly as is humanly possible. So with that, I don't know, Shelley, if you want to say anything else or if we want to see if there are any questions coming in from the field.
I think we might want to move on to questions because we only have a few minutes left. I would say that, for those of you who are applying for federal funds for the first time, this can seem very daunting. We know. But last year we received far more applications than we could fund that were excellent. So we know it's possible to do it. We also have our staff available to help you to the extent that we have time available. So please take advantage of the email line here and continually check back on the frequently asked questions part of our website, as we will update those as we get more information.
You can almost count on weekly us updating that based on questions you're asking that weren't properly answered in the FAQ. So, Thaddeus, do we have any questions from the field?
So the first question, are political subdivisions of state or local governments eligible to apply for funding?
So on the regional program, they can be part of the consortium. They could not apply individually. But they, as I said, once you have the three main elements, again, the regional entities that are required by the eligible applicant list, the local jurisdiction, and then finally the nonprofit partner, other partners, including state partners or state designated partners, could be a part of that mix. So yes.
Next question. Please clarify about leverage resources and give examples.
Okay. So first, think of it this way. You are required to have a 20% match. So if you're asking for $1 million, you have to bring 20% to the table to match that $1 million. At the point at which you bring that 20%, you are eligible for the competition. That match can be cash, it can be staff time, and there's a number of other in-kind resources that are listed in the NOFA that are allowable. At that point, after it becomes that first 20%, we begin to refer to it as the resources you are leveraging toward the grant. And you can get points depending on how much the value is of those additional resources you're bringing to the table. So there's basically two kinds of things. You're requesting a certain amount of money, you're bringing a certain amount of money or activities to the table, and then you will be judged on that leverage going forward. There is a last piece, which is the alignment leverage, if you will, which is you're aligning your state planning office with you, you're aligning the federal planning activities with you, and there is credit that we are counting, or points you can possibly get in that section of the application. But essentially it's match, bring your 20%, and then additional will be counted as points.
And to follow up on that, please give an example on how the matching percentage is calculated.
It's basically right off of the amount that you are requesting from your grant. So 20%, if you want to ask for $1 million, you need to bring a match that's 20% of that $1 million. And then, after you get above 20%, there are points you can be awarded in the grant if you're bringing a larger percentage than that to the table.
Next question. Will Factor 4 have scores?
Well, rating Factor 4 is leverage. It will have scores. It's worth up to 7 points.
Next question. Can you define the term leverage as in terms of local match?
I think that's pretty much what we covered. I don't think there's anything more to add to that. But if you check the frequently asked questions, we have some different scenarios that you can run through. And then we'll look at that and see if there's some additional clarification we can do as well.
And following that, as for the 20% minimum local match, is that for the entire project cost or grant request? For example, if the total project cost is $5 million, then the minimum match would be $1 million. Or is the minimum match $1 million for a $5 million grant request, with the total project cost being $6 million?
So the train left Chicago at 7 p.m. And, let me say it this way. If let's say you have a planning project that's going to cost a total of $5 million, and you decide you want to apply for let's say you're a medium-sized region, so you apply for $3 million. And then you actually get up the commitments from other agencies or communities or foundations or whoever to cover the balance. Your $3 million request would require a 20% match, which would be $600,000. By having the $2 million committed to close your project gap, you've actually exceeded that, and you would start to get points towards the application because you're leveraging additional dollars in your match to what's required. So again, the match is based on the dollar request to the agency, not to the total project cost or the anticipated cost of all the activities that could happen as a consequence of the planning.
I might add that we tried very hard to make sure that this requirement did a couple of things. One, it really was able to show us your level of commitment to the initiative, and that's why there is a match. The second was to provide extreme flexibility in these very tough economic times to communities who may not have cash floating around to do this, but might have staff that could be dedicated to the project, consortium members, partners who could dedicate their staff or have other funding sources for those activities. So it's actually quite flexible, and last year I think we found that most people did a good job of finding the resources to be able to do this.
Mm-hmm. Next question. This is for civil rights and federal debt. So the question's organization will be the lead applicant and currently has no civil rights issues and federal debt. If one of our partners has either a civil rights issue and or federal debt, does this make our proposal ineligible?
Actually, the general section lays out a specific process to follow. If what happens when you send in your pre-application, we will be vetting it for any violations or pending actions that are happening with you and the partners that you've identified. That actually has to be done again because your partners you could actually add partners between the time you submit your pre-app and you do your full application. But in any case, if there is someone in the partnership who has those violations, there's a process that's laid out in the general section on how you continue to move forward and be able to be eligible in the competition. But I will say that those have to be resolved in order to be able to receive the award. There are action plans that can be established for that. So it is a valid concern. We did have a few folks who had to kind of work some things out to be able to be eligible for the full competition last year.
Next question. May an MPO that has jurisdiction in 4 counties submit an application that covers only 2 of those counties?
An MPO that has jurisdiction in 4 counties. So they're asking in some ways about, it sounds like only in the case, and I would say in this case, you'd want to submit a specific question to us to verify this. You can't subdivide the basic geography building blocks that were offered, which were the MSA, the metropolitan or micropolitan statistical area, the MPO boundary, if that's the boundary you're using, or the state mandated district or the EDA district. So if by doing 2 of the 4 counties in this example, you're subdividing that basic building block, that probably wouldn't be allowable.
Although I might say that if your issue areas focus in on a part of your geography, of course your work plan can say we're going to be focusing on the central part of our region in order to do this work because this is where the issues are. Right. But we need you to include the geography consistent with the guidelines in the NOFA.
Right.
Okay, next question. Is there an estimate of when the grants will be awarded? Knowing when HUD expects to award the grants may help communities better define the cost to be included in the budget.
Well, maybe I'll take that one. We are not allowed to identify the dates for announcing of the awards. We, as the chart that Dwayne showed lays out, have been condensing our review efforts and all the processing time as quickly as possible so that we can obligate these funds as soon as the competition is finished. These are resources that hire people in communities, and so we want to make sure that grant funds are out. But again, we are not able to identify a specific date.
It's an aggressive timeline.
Next question. If you are a Category 2, can you use funds to build and construct and/or purchase property?
One of 3. As a Category 2, there are limited pre-development expenses you can actually plan for or put into your budget, including land acquisition. I should say there's a very thorough set of guidelines around that land acquisition that, you should consider that carefully. Now, planning for projects that are capital investments or actual projects is definitely allowable. I believe it's 40% of your grant, in fact, could be spent doing planning on site-specific projects that will advance the implementation of your project if you are Category 2. So again, it's very clearly spelled out in the NOFA those conditions, and I recommend taking a look at that.
This question is, are federal transportation planning funds that MPOs receive eligible for use as match under this program?
No. However, if in fact you were to align your planning activities for the regional plan with the planning activities of the transportation plan, you may get credit for aligning those planning efforts together, because obviously that will, when we have alignment between local, state, regional, and federal activities, we're going to see better outcomes in communities. But no on the match. Unless you find a statute, authorizing statute that specifically says that federal funds can be used for match, they cannot be used for match.
Well, let me just amplify that just a little bit. This restriction came up quite significantly in our first year of grants, and we made the modification in order to make sure that all of us, including you, were able to use federal funds legitimately. I would say that there are a number of the first round of grantees that are aligning and, in fact, to some extent, double tracking their updates of their regional transportation plan with the development of the Sustainable Communities Regional Plan. In fact, a lot of the activities that are being used with federal transportation funds help cover things that would that might be done through a Sustainable Communities Planning grant. So again, as Dwayne said, we are very interested in alignment of activities, and particularly alignment of federally required plans, but we won't be able to count the funds from that effort unless you are able to document permission to do that.
And I'm going to check with our superlative studio team to see if we can run over about 3 or 4 minutes, just because we got a slightly late start. We'll go maybe to 2:03 or 2:04 to get as many questions as we can. Ted?
Okay. Next question. Is cash match required, or can the 20% plus be all in kind?
The 20% plus can be all in kind, and often we saw successful applicants from last year use their own staff commitments as part of that match, and that is completely allowable.
Next question. What kind of proof of consortium partnerships is needed for the pre-application?
A very good question. So in the pre-application process, I believe it's page 32 of the NOFA, we lay out the 6 things or 5 things you need to do in order to submit your pre-application. When you read through the whole 70-page document and you realize you only have to do these 6 things, you're going to go, wow, this is really actually not that hard to do. Because it's true. We just want to make sure you're getting these basic thresholds correct. One of them is identifying the members of the consortium that you have, that you want to have in there. At the point of the submission of the pre-app, you're listing those partners. You have until the application to actually bring in the full documentation of those partners. But at the time of the application itself, there is thorough documentation. People have to sign letters. They can't be form letters. They need to be letters saying, we will be a partner in this. We will contribute in this way. If they're bringing in-kind match, they have to kind of bring those things in as well. And they also have to acknowledge that they will be signing a consortium agreement that's a binding document for them to be participants if they receive the full grant.
Next question. I work for a council of governments, which is stated as a local government under Oregon state law. We are also an EDA, Economic Development District. Are we ourselves eligible to be an applicant?
You are eligible to be the geography of an application. You are eligible to be a part of the application or the consortium applying. But individually as your own entity, you would not be able to apply. Councils of governments need to bring jurisdictions representatives as those jurisdictions, not just because they're members of the Council of Governments. An EDA district that has members from the local governments will still have to bring the local government partners individually, and you'd still need an independent nonprofit partner.
Next question. What should we use as a project start date for budgeting match reasons?
Basically, think of it as a 36-month timeline unless you're in a place where you think this process is going to move faster, and start with month 1. And what will happen is once the award is made, there's a budget negotiation process. You negotiate on your work plans. As I mentioned, these are cooperative agreements, so we're very hands-on in this way, and the timeline will be based off of how long the negotiations take to finish solidifying that grant.
Maybe last
Next question.
Yeah, we'll take one more question.
Okay. And it is there an official difference between a core consortium listed in the pre-app and the consortium in the full app? Do core consortium members have to be explicitly resources in the budget?
Core consortium members have to be explicitly identified. The broader consortium should be identified if it's known at the time of the pre-app, but certainly at the time of the application, anybody who you're including in the consortium should be there. If there are budget resources going to consortium partners, that should be identified. And if any entity or sub-grantee or consortium member is receiving 10% or more of the dollars from the grant, then they have to have their own budget form submitted as well, especially if this is going into the application, you know this. So I think that covers all those pieces.
But maybe I can add, just to be very clear. It is not required that all members of the core consortium receive funding through the project. We don't have opinions about that. We are looking at outcomes and not the strict allocation of funding.
Right. Now, looks like we had a couple other questions we may not be able to get to today. However, what I'd say is if you send a question in today to sustainablecommunities@hud.gov, we will get back to you, and we will post those responses on our FAQ as well, especially if they are new territory that was not currently included in a already long document of FAQ. So with that, I think that concludes the time we have. I want to thank Shelley for joining us to give a little bit more of the feel from the federal arena. And remind folks, 13 days and counting for the pre-app. It's not hard. Do it. Keep going forward. And read the NOFA. So again, Dwayne Marsh, Senior Advisor, thanking you for your time, and we'll look forward to seeing your pre-apps shortly.